Harvard Divinity School.
Uses and abuses of power in alternative spiritualities. Implications for spiritual care of patients and communities. April 28, 2023.
I think we're great. Thank you. All right. So this is the tower crumbles, but now you can see the star, queer temporalities, religious affects, and healing through tarot practice. Walking into a metaphysical shop in Iowa City, Iowa, I am confronted with a towering display of tarot cards. The decks range in price from less than $20 to more than $70 for decks which are particularly intricate or contain accompanying guidebooks or other interpretive materials. Also striking is the representation of various identities in the decks. In addition to the standard Rider-Waite-Smith deck, there are Indigenous tarot, African tarot, feminist tarot, and countless other representations of how the tarot is able to serve diverse communities through its semiotic and representative approach to spiritualities. This theme became the central point of my research, examining the role that tarot practice can play for queer practitioners and audiences. Representation, though, is only one facet of the way that tarot negotiates the boundaries of queer histories, lives, and temporalities. In tarot practice, queer people are able to adapt this long-standing spiritual ritual practice in order to uniquely create queer time and a non-linear sense of futurity. More concisely, tarot's discursiveness, non-linear temporality, and affective intimacy, I will argue here, uniquely suits it to help queer subjects simultaneously reckon with complicated pasts while also imagining hopeful futures. In order to explore this claim, I draw substantively from work in queer theory, including Jose Esteban Munoz's Cruising Utopia and Pellegrini's Queer Structures of Religious Feeling, What Time Is Now, religious affect theory, such as Donovan Schaefer's Religious Affects, Tyler Roberts' Experiencing Religion, and Karen Bray and Stephen Moore's Religion, Emotion, Sensation, and finally, anthropological approaches to temporal studies, including Lauren Berlant's seminal Cruel Optimism and Rebecca Bryant and Daniel Knight's Anthropology of the Future. In the first section of this presentation, I want to explore both the historical context of tarot practice as well as some of these theoretical frameworks. Next, I'll introduce two case studies, both of which are from ethnographic work I conducted at Grinnell College in the spring of 2022. Each case study represents a traditional past, present, future tarot reading conducted between a queer identifying practitioner and a queer identifying subject. By juxtaposing these case studies with my theoretical groundwork in the first section, it will become clear just how valuable of a tool tarot can be for queer subjects to both formally and informally negotiate their relationships with their pasts, presents, and futures. The origins of tarot are relatively murky. There is general consensus that the tarot first developed in northern Italy around the 15th century in what one might call an aristocratic milieu, with many of the early cards exemplifying the extravagance of Italian nobility. The purpose of why these cards were created, however, is less clear. On one hand, some scholars and practitioners believe that the cards may have been created for games, much like a deck of playing cards. There are, however, other inferences that the long-standing exoteric symbolism in the cards points to their use as tools for divination even earlier than the 19th century, when the more occultist tradition and practice of tarot became widespread in Europe. The cards themselves are organized into majors and minors. The majors consist of 22 cards numbered 0, which is the Fool, to 21, which is the World. When put in order, the majors tell the story of a particular journey, generally speaking, from frivolity and naivete to fulfillment. From a semiotic perspective, connection to the cards through representation can be extremely important. Take, for example, these two depictions of cards 16 and 17, the Tower and the Star. Oh, there you go. And so here we see first the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith Tower and the Star, and then a reimagining of these two cards from Christy C. Rhodes' Next World Tarot deck, where the Tower is reimagined as revolution. In the first depiction, we see these traditional images of the flaming tower crumbling in order to make way for the water bearer to recultivate the earth and the star. As one practitioner explained to me, so there's the tarot and then the star. We would say that no card is inherently negative or positive, but I would say the Tower is one of the most troubling cards in a reading. It's all about destruction, chaos, and upheaval. But the star is like a spiritual reawakening. It's about rebirth. It could have connotations of any kind of renewal, but usually the figure is by the water, so it could be interpreted as baptism or a kind of spiritual rebirth. But what people say is that, quote, the tower falls, but because the tower falls, now you can see the star. You can also think about it in a systemic way. These systems crumble, and now you can see the star, which is new, but also represents a very pure truth, end quote. Here, this rendering is magnified in many ways by Rhodes' Next World Tarot. Rather than just the tower falling, it's the world. Subversiveness is represented in more than one way. We see representations of Native and Indigenous-led organizing, as well as hijabi women rallying against oil companies and pipelines. Then, in the star card, the original white water bearer is replaced by a clothed, brown-skinned figure. But more interestingly, the stars surrounding this figure have become butterflies. There is a sense of flight and freedom in this depiction. Power has been distributed intentionally in the semiotics of Rhodes' deck, which then empowers those practicing with this deck to see themselves more holistically and therefore forge more meaningful and complete connections to the practice. A second example of the politics of representation in these two decks can be seen in my next slide, which shows the lovers in each of these decks. The card from the Rider-Waite-Smith deck is a classical rendering of man and woman. There may even be some biblical allusion to Adam and Eve, indicated by the pair's nudity, as well as the imagery of the fruit tree and the snake behind the more feminine figure. In Rhodes' rendering, however, we see love being cultivated for the self by the self. Here there's a representation of gender nonconformity, disability from the cane, fatness and body dysmorphia from the mirror and the spoons, and queerness indicated by the figure's pink triangle tattoo. So many people from so many marginalized communities are given the ability to see themselves in this card, again allowing for expanded connection between the practitioner and the ritual, therefore making the practice more intimate and therefore more effective. Like the majors, the four minor arcana, the wands, swords, cups, and pentacles, can also be organized by number in order to tell the story of a particular journey. Like a standard deck of cards, each minor moves from ace to king. One example of this is the journey depicted in the suit of cups. Here, the symbolism of the cups is used to show travel through both a literal journey, the landscape as it changes in each card, and a developmental or personal journey negotiated from the symbolism. The cups are related to the element of water and are traditionally symbolic of emotional journeys. That is to say that in a reading, the ace may be representative of a fresh start or a new beginning, a quote, good time to open the heart, while the king represents quote, full control of one's emotions and the ability to balance them with logic, according to Cassandra Snow in her Queering the Tarot. Overall, the presence of time inside the tarot deck is immediately tangible and intimately important to the practice. On one hand, the representation of several different journeys in a way exudes a sense of cyclical rather than linear temporal structures. Further, though, the interspersement and layering of cards from all different journeys and all different parts of these journeys even further shows the importance of disrupting expected temporal structures and constructing something new, something imagined, what I argue is queering time. In the same way, we see this idea of disruption and reconstruction being utilized semiotically in one example of Christy C. Rhodes' Next World Tarot deck's reconfiguration of the classical tarot symbols to make space for people who don't see themselves in those cards to see themselves here. This same sort of disrupted, followed by a reconstructive process, is unsurprisingly also central to queer understandings and reimaginings, both of time and religion. The notion of queer lenses for understanding the phenomenon of temporality, religion, and affect are all connected foundationally by their subversiveness. Beginning first with Jose Esteban Munoz's Cruising Utopia as a foundation for queerness and time, Munoz tells us that, quote, queerness is the thing that lets us feel that this world is not enough and that indeed something is missing. Queerness is essentially about the rejection of here and now and an insistence on potentiality or concrete possibilities for new worlds. End quote. This idea for Munoz is necessarily entangled with the principle of hope. Drawing from Bryan and Knight, hope can be formally understood as a futural momentum, which invites people to imagine not yets from the potentiality of the present. Thus, this shows us that queerness and hope are both distinguished by the ideas of imagining and potentiality, making them naturally disposed to being manifested in the same spaces. Tarot, as will be shown in my case studies, is the ideal liminal space for this kind of imagining to take place because it not only allows the queer subject to engage with their queerness and these ideas of hope simultaneously, but also avoids the traps of Berlant's cruel optimism by necessitating a juxtaposition between reckoning with challenges and attachments of the past and imaginings of these futures. The notion of reckoning is facilitated by the rituality, liminality, and affect present in the tarot reading space. Turning now to understand queerness, it is imperative to think about both feeling and the body. So to understand religion through a queer lens, then, it is essential to move beyond notions of text-based religiosity to instead, or perhaps additionally, understand the body as a site for religious practice and affective experience. According to Brandy Daniels, two parts are central to this idea. The first is that religious discourse is, quote, preceded and accompanied by vulnerability and a sense of surrender to divine, and that it, quote, mysteriously challenges and expands the range of rationality and simultaneously darkens and breaks one's hold on previous realities, end quote. In other words, there is a discursive element in which the participant uses the ritual to decipher a new or more desirable image of what the future can be. This, though, requires the practitioner also to break with previous assumptions and understandings or change the relationship they have to the past. Furthermore, a second central part of this idea is, according to Kimmerer Lamoth, quote, the ritual exists as a place to practice patterns of thinking and feeling and acting that unfolds a human capacity for doing so. The ritual succeeds if it quickens in participants the pleasure of their own bodily becoming, enabling them in their development to become people who can experience ritual as a blast of life-affirming, life-confirming reality, end quote. From these facets, we see how ritual, like time, can be queered or made to represent a new discursive tool for understanding oneself, one's body, and one's relationship to the temporal domain. While this can be used for a variety of rituals and theologies, tarot becomes in many ways an ideal vessel for this work because of its explicit engagement with these structures of time and ability to curate an affective and liminal space, both semiotically and ritually. Moving then from theory into practice, we can see how these ideas emerge into case studies. In my small sample of case studies, I observed two readings conducted between queer subjects and practitioners. Both readings began with the preparation of the space and altar, including the burning of incense and an offering of a small amount of food, which both the reader and receiver had eaten before the ritual began. After the space was prepared, that is to say, set apart from ordinary space, the receiver selected one of 8 tarot decks to which they felt most connected. Then the readings began as both reader and receiver sat on the floor in front of the altar. Because the readings were conducted in a past, present, future style, the ritual itself was common across both readings. The receiver is asked to set an intention for the reading. This intention could be a particular question, problem, or theme, and will serve as a point of orientation for meaning making once the cards are drawn. Next, the cards are shuffled a number of times and then fanned out face down between the two, allowing the receiver to select cards one by one. In both cases, the receiver spent several seconds moving their hands along the cards before making a selection, emphasizing the role of the body in this ritual practice. Next, the cards are flipped over one at a time, the reader performing the reading in respect to the receiver, which means as it faces them. Finally, the reader asks for initial responses and then continues in a discursive manner as the two work together to make sense of what the cards could mean or symbolize for the person in the reading. So case 1 is called Temporal Symmetries and Cycles, and I have some excerpts from the transcripts which will be on the screen, so I'll give you a moment to read before I go into my analysis. So in this reading, the most important part of the case is the way that the receiver seems to feel connected to the images in the cards. They are drawn to particular cards because of the way they look, substantiating the idea that the semiotics of tarot play a major role in the kind of affective environment that is created during the ritual. This is a phenomenon also explored ethnographically by Marcelette Faella, who noticed in her studies with Black tarot practitioners that as Black creators design images with Black iconography and develop spreads that call on their ancestors, they connect readers to a divination system that reflects their lineage, allowing for greater forms of belonging and intimacy to be curated. While the way this relationality is explored in this reading is perhaps less sophisticated than this work, we can see that the receiver sees themselves as an adventurer and is therefore drawn to the way that they're shown in the cards. At the same time, there is also some inkling of fear or perhaps anticipation surrounding the future. This recalls the way Daniels encourages religiosity as a way of expanding horizons. Most prominently, though, this reading serves as a way to help the receiver embrace and live more fully in the present and near future. The constant reference to appreciating the last few weeks of this experience, moving on to new themes, is full of gratitude and fulfillment. The second case study I called Out of Order Ends and Beginnings and came with themes of resilience and rebirth. In order, the cards here drawn, because the deck's a little bit more murky, this is called the Luminous Tarot, are the Nine of Cups, the Four of Wands, and the Five of Swords. And so this is beginning with the present. In this excerpt, talking about the present card, there is a tremendous reference to coming to terms and feeling fulfillment in the present. The notion of comfort in queer spaces is particularly relevant at this point in the receiver's life, and the theme of home is particularly relevant to Munoz's concept of utopia and his challenge to, quote, look beyond the here and now to insist on something better, which was particularly felt affectually over the course of this reading, especially as we continue into discerning the past and the future. So this is now the past. This section shows the discursive nature of putting the tarot cards into combination with each other, as well as how temporal structures are negotiated and transcended consistently and intentionally through this practice. Here, there's an abundant quality of religious affect or queer economies marked by relationships between bodies and power that are twisting the rationale of self-interest, borrowing there from Donovan Schaefer. There is a wishing, but the wishing takes place in the past, bringing out the potentiality of partial or perhaps even total fulfillment, actively calling the receiver to think about what is right, what they hope, and how they've grown. Moving finally then to the future. So in summation, the final card of this reading is perhaps the most poignant for relating to the work of tarot and healing. Here, it can be clearly observed how the future and past exist simultaneously in the liminal space of the present during the tarot reading. The future card is calling the receiver to reckon with traumas and struggles of their past, but at the same time gives the space for imagining potentialities that are so important to the way both Brian and Knight understand hope as momentum, and Munoz and Daniels describe potentiality as a strong and vital source of queer energy. Furthermore, the reading also engages directly with the notion of trauma, substantiating the work of Faella and noting that, quote, tarot becomes a tool as we navigate and heal from violence that affects our physical and psychological selves. It is not simply a reinterpretation of a divination practice, but the creation of a new healing modality. Thus, this case study epitomizes the kind of relationship that can be built when religion, body, and time are understood and evoked in the same space. The ultimate idea that emerges out of the two examples of tarot readings in this paper is the symmetry between the way theorists are discussing links between queer subversiveness in ritual and time and how queer practitioners make and experience that time through tarot ritual. In her essay arguing for a Freudian psychoanalysis as a queer structure of religious feeling, Anne Pellegrini asks, can you be touched by two times at once? And if so, with what benefits and what losses? I suggest the very experience of trauma as a fracture in secular time. Quote. Pellegrini even goes so far to suggest a metaphor in which she contends Freud positions the presumptively male physician in a role as a kind of spiritual medium in order to explore how the past continues to haunt the present and shape the future. This argument, though I don't necessarily characterize tarot practice as on par with psychoanalysis, is similarly exhibited through the simultaneity with which time is experienced and negotiated in a liminal affective ritual space. The difference, though, is twofold. First, tarot allows receivers to be distinctly and directly engaged with the semiotic dimension of understanding their temporal positionality, which, as we observed in both case studies and through Faye's work with Black tarot practitioners, is essential to meeting the demands of the politics of representation. Second, psychoanalysis is concerned with the coexistence of past and present, creating a structure like cruel optimism, to quote Berlant, where the weight of the past may prevent the subject from moving into their imagined future. Oppositely, tarot practice suspends the present in an affective spiritual space, setting it apart from straight time, to quote Munoz, or linear time, as we may commonly know it, in order to heal the past by imagining a hopeful, queer future. Thus, tarot is a practice which actively facilitates the horizon that Munoz imagines in his conclusion as, quote, going back through religion and philosophy, stepping out of time and place, leaving the here and now of straight time for a then and there that might be queer futurity. Thus, understanding the queer tarot practice is a complex and multidimensional tool for dealing with both personal and communal trauma, adds new contributions in the studies of affect theory, temporality, religious studies, and more. Lamothe tells us that the most interesting questions in the study of religion are not about what is. They instead concern the possibilities for human thought, feeling, and action that different patterns of thinking, feeling, and acting can open in those who practice. This project adds a new perspective for the ways in which the body functions not as text, but as a site for religious affect and ritual practice, and opens a discourse where tarot can perform the work of moving beyond what is. In temporal studies, this paper contributes to the surrounding discussions of relationality between past, present, and future, showcasing a new view in which past and present can be simultaneously experienced through ritual space. Finally, each of these phenomena are uniquely constructed around ideas originating from queer theory and from the minds and bodies of queer practitioners. The queer framing of time, religion, and affect, both separately and together, privileges subversiveness, community, and liberation in ways that are necessarily transcendent of traditional notions of boundaries, barriers, and yes, linearity. This, at its heart, is a paper about privileging the experienced, lived, and imagined. It is a depiction of healing, and it is an argument for hope. Thank you.
Sponsored by the Program for the Evolution of Spirituality.
Copyright 2023, the President and Fellows of Harvard College.